Good morning. Welcome back to Purdue Extension, Harrison County, Cassidy Kitchen. We're here today to give you an overview of the lovely little persimmon. The persimmon started in Japan and has been propagated for thousands of years, and there are multiple types you might find in the grocery store. Those are usually imported. Indiana has its own supply of native persimmons, various kinds. Usually they're smaller than the Japanese kind, and they're absolutely delicious when prepared very ripe. They're very sweet and delicious. And a very good thing about persimmons is that they're extremely high in vitamin A. And so that's a very good thing for us to have some vitamin A. One fruit, if you get the larger fruit, one whole fruit is 118 calories. So it's fairly low calories, very sweet once you get it right, but you have to have it completely ripe. Otherwise, it gives you a little kind of a puckery feeling in your mouth, which some people say, I don't like persimmons, they're puckery. Well, it's because they didn't ripen them. So they can be ripened and they can be put away in pulp in the freezer. They can be cooked in foods and those frozen. So they're very, very versatile. I'm Annette Lawler, and this is my county here in Harrison County, and I'm going to do a persimmon pudding. This is Gail Peitzmeyer, and she's going to help us with, well, she's Crawford County, and this is Sonia Mitchell, and she is Washington County, and she's going to start us off today with her persimmon cookie recipe.
The first recipe we're going to demonstrate today is persimmon cookies. This recipe comes from an Indiana extension homemaker, Marilyn Day. This is one of their favorite recipes, and she's been gracious enough to share it with us and let us share it with you. So here we have our containers with our ingredients here on this tray. We've got everything all together, ready to go. So now we're going to cream the butter. And now we're going to take and gradually add our sugar. We have 2 cups of sugar that we're going to gradually add to our butter and continue to cream. The butter has been brought to room temperature prior to being put into the mixer. And this is important. This will help the creaming process go smoothly. Bill's going to gradually add the sugar to the butter. You want to be careful that you don't get caught in the mixing bowl. She's being cautious and gradually adding the sugar, keeping her distance from the mixer. Always remember, safety first in the kitchen. So we have our butter and sugar creamed nicely. It's about the consistency of frosting. You want to show them what that looks like on your spatula there, Gail, so they know how well blended it is. Absolutely wonderful. Good job. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the persimmon pulp, eggs, and vanilla. This is our persimmon pulp. This was locally harvested here in Indiana. It's a regional favorite. We're going to have our eggs in there next. We've got 2 eggs. Once you get those mixed. Two teaspoons of vanilla. Make sure that all the ingredients are well blended. And she's going to use her spatula and scrape the sides of the bowl. Again, turn it off before she scrapes the side because we want to be safe in the kitchen. Another thing we'll be adding to the recipe later on is walnuts. These are not your typical walnuts that we see in the grocery store. Most of the time what you see is the English walnut. These are black walnuts. I did buy them in our local grocery store, but you want to make sure that they are labeled as such, that it actually says black walnuts. These walnuts are bold in their flavor. They're very distinct from the English walnut, which is what most of the walnuts in the grocery store are today. These actually grow wild most of the time, while the English walnut grows in an orchard. This is also one of the most highly content for protein in a tree nut. And this recipe calls us simply for black walnuts.
We'll mix this a little bit more.
All right,
Kind of
just scrape
scrape
the
the
ball.
bottom, yeah.
Okay, it looks like she's got that thoroughly mixed, and next we're going to add our dry ingredients, which are the 4 cups of all-purpose flour. Then we have our spices and our baking soda, baking powder, and salt. So we've got allspice, cinnamon, and nutmeg mixed in this bowl. So now it's time to gradually add those to our mixer.
I will sift this into the flour. The flour's already been sifted. So I'm going to go ahead and this is, if you don't have a regular flour sifter, you can always just use a strainer, handheld strainer like this. It worked out just fine.
Those seasonings do smell good together.
Wonderful. Okay.
Nutmeg and cinnamon go great together. All right, we're going to start to add our dry ingredients. Starting to turn out into a nice consistency, starting to look more like cookie dough. So now we've got our persimmon dough thoroughly mixed, and we're going to remove it from the mixer, and I think we're just going to hand stir in the walnuts and the raisins before we drop it on the cookie sheet.
Look at how stuff is.
That's beautiful.
Yes.
So let's take a look at our cookie dough that we have mixed up here. You can see it's a kind of stiff, thick dough. That's exactly what we want, nice and creamy, well mixed. And the next thing we're going to do in the final stages here is we're going to add a cup of raisins. And we're going to mix these items up by hand. So we've got a cup of raisins. And then Gail's going to add in 2 cups of walnuts, the black walnuts.
I can smell them. They're wonderful. Too bad we don't have smell-o-vision.
Yes, they are distinct. If you get the black walnuts, you will notice right away these are very different from the English walnuts. So she's going to get that all mixed together. We have 2 prepared cookie sheets that are ready for the cookies. We're going to start with this one. It has the parchment paper on it. The great thing about parchment paper when you're baking is that you can cut it to fit any size pan that you're using. So we have one pan with parchment paper. The other pan, you can see that here, is lined with a silicone baking sheet. This is reusable, but it is not cuttable. So if you have a cooking in an odd-shaped pan, you'll definitely want to use the parchment paper. The silicone, the food grade silicone, comes in only select sizes and you cannot cut it. The advantage to this is if you're making something where you have to cook at a much higher temperature, sometimes the parchment paper can't handle that high temperature that long, like peanut brittle, things like that, but the silicone, the food grade silicone, we can. All right, so we're going to use a cookie scoop and we're going to spray it with a little non-stick to try to help our cookies not stick to our cookie scooper. And Gail's just going to start lining the sheets with cookies. Beautiful.
Okay.
Here's one. We're going to put it in the oven for 350 degrees. There we go. And we're going to bake them for about 12 to 15 minutes. And I think this would be a good time too that we can try and see if the cooking time varies or what results we get using the two different services on our cookie sheet.
Of course, if somebody's allergic to nuts.
You can always leave those out. The
Leave those
walnuts
out.
are optional, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're allergic to nuts, definitely. And then maybe if you find the walnuts, the black walnut, too bold of a flavor, feel free to leave it out or swap in another nut. All right, and they're in the oven. We'll get back to you in about 15 minutes.
Now we're just gonna take them over to the cooling rack. It appears they did not spread very much, so that's good to know. They did just fine on the silicone pad. Super, there you go.
All right, so here are our cookies out of the oven. They've cooled on the rack. We've put them on this plate here. They are very delicious. Everyone in the building is coming downstairs wanting to know what smells so wonderful, and they definitely smell wonderful. And I will say that the black walnuts were really a super nice touch in this particular cookie. So we hope you get to make this recipe, and we're happy to be able to share it with you. And just thank you for watching our video. Look at these perfect round ones. These must have been a cookie scoop.
Yes, the cookie
Yes.
scoop helped a lot. And we
Yes.
also did change the trays halfway
Yes.
during baking.
Yeah, we did 2 trays at a time in the oven, and then we would switch the location halfway through. And she's right, I did some free-handed ones with spoons, but if you use the cookie scooper, then the consistency is the same, and they all come out not overbaked, but just right. And we were
So-
going to count them. However,
We ate too many for my goodness.
we
So,
ate.
It makes a lot. It's a big recipe. It's a wonderful soft cookie. The aroma is incredible.
It possibly made 20 more than what you see here, but we won't
Possibly.
tell. It's
Yeah.
possible. All right.
And yum yum, persimmons in the fall.
Enjoy.
Enjoy.
Hello, this is Annette, and we're back for our next recipe. This kitchen smells amazing with those cookies, and so Sonia and Gail are going to continue to bake and remove cookies, and we'll show you that when we get to the end. But now I'm going to put together the persimmon pudding mix. And I don't know how many of you had what maybe people call persimmon pudding, and it's in like a brownie format. It's a square. Well, my grandmother didn't do it that way. My grandmother had a farm in Putnam County, plus she had lived in Richton and Mansfield for years, and had come up with what she called Indiana style persimmon pudding. And so what we do is we will put it in the pan, and then ever so many minutes, then we will stir it. And when we're done, we'll have a very thick pudding texture that you eat with a spoon rather than a square-shaped bar. And that will be typical of my family history, going back to my childhood, because this is my favorite recipe my grandmother made for a dessert for us when we would go to her farm. And so we started off, and I did my flour and my sugar and a little bit of cinnamon, and have that in here. And then I stirred that up, and now I'm going to go ahead and add the eggs, which is 3 eggs. Looks a little bit. Start mixing up. And we have a tablespoon of butter, which was softened in the microwave. And then we have our 1 cup of persimmon pulp, which if it's good and ripe, which this is, It is so ripe and sweet you could just eat it with a spoon like this. It's delicious. I don't want to lose any of it. And then we have our baking soda mixed in just a little bit of water so it mixes up and doesn't make lumps. And the pudding will disperse very well. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mix that just a little bit. Now you could with this put nuts or raisins or something like that, but her traditional recipe did not have that. And this is bringing, like I said, bringing back a childhood memory. A lot of times when you have fall baking or you get into a baking season or holidays, you really go back to your childhood and the way things were done when you were a kid. And I found this particular recipe because I lost my grandmother, somehow could never find her recipe, which kind of was hard because she sort of just looked at stuff and put it in a bowl. And so to find an actual written recipe for her was kind of hard. So I looked and looked and looked, and one time I was on campus at Purdue, and a friend of mine there took me out to a man's farm where he actually did persimmon trees, and he had worked on campus. He was retired, but he had worked on campus with propagating trees and that sort of thing. And so that's what he did. And we went there and picked up persimmon pulp from him. And I talked to him about my grandmother's recipe. He goes, oh, I can do that. He says, I have that recipe. And so, again, it's an Indiana kind of tradition. And this calls for a quart of milk. So my bowl is going to be a little bit tight on size here. And so it's a very loose kind of batter. And I have gone ahead and sprayed my dish with nonstick spray. So there I have all of my ingredients into the persimmon pudding mix. And interestingly, as you stir it while it bakes, it gets a nice brown, almost a chocolatey looking color, which we will see at the end. And of course, right out of the oven, it's absolutely delicious to serve with ice cream because it's hot, or you can serve it cold with ice cream or whipped cream, which we will use whipped cream today. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put this in the oven. I'm going to get a tray and set it on a baking tray in case it for some reason would slop or spill. It wouldn't get on my oven. So I will be back with you when we take this out the oven. Okay, so the persimmon pudding recipe calls for cooking it for 50 to 60 minutes. And normally it would come out just like a square shape like that. A rectangle, whatever your pan is. But what we're doing is we're giving it a really good stir. We're just going to make it very dense, and it's going to make it have an actual pudding texture. So as soon as I get these sides all the way scraped down and stir it in completely. Now I'm going to go ahead and put it back in the oven for another 20 minutes and then stir again and keep doing that until it's done. Okay, we're back with the end of our persimmon recipes. This is the persimmon pudding made the way my grandmother did it. And here is a sample version of how it is as a dessert when it's served. Yum, yum.